Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Colin. Welcome to Earwax. And today we're going to be going over my top 5 albums of 2023. Now, these are just going to be my personal favorite albums from last year. They are the ones that I ended up listening to over and over again, more frequently than some other albums. I will admit there are some picks that may not be objectively the best albums that came out last year, but again, they're just the ones that resonated the most with me. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, coming in at number 5 is going to be Unreal Unearth by Hosier. Now, I absolutely love Hosier. I was a huge fan of the self-titled debut album. I loved that sort of DIY indie folk aesthetic that he had going on throughout that album. I also did really like Wasteland Baby as well. A little bit more polished, a little bit more put together, leaned heavier into some like soul and R&B. But I did feel like on Wasteland Baby, we're missing a little bit of the DIY aesthetics that we got on the self-titled. And I think this album is a really good mix between the two of them. It is pretty much a concept album. I think it kind of follows Dante's Inferno and the descent through the 9 levels of hell and the reascent. So like all of the album is broken up into those sections with a couple songs in each section. I think the opening couple tracks to Selby Part 1 and 2 are absolutely incredible. Which is a great way to kick off the album. The singles from the album are really good as well, including Eat Your Young, which is kind of in the middle of the track. I think it's on like third or fourth level. And then the last couple tracks are incredible as well, specifically the Ascent. It's just like the last kind of bit of the album. Again, he really does a good job of incorporating sort of the indie folk style that he's known for and the more polished, put together soul and R&B that he was doing on Wasteland Baby. The production value on this album is insane. I think it is really just well mixed and well done front to back. My brother-in-law actually played the percussion on most of the tracks on this album. And I love picking his brain about like what those recording studio sessions were like. So yeah, absolutely incredible album. I can't wait to see what Hosier keeps deciding to put out. And easy pick for the top 5 from 2023. All right, coming in at number 4 is going to be Cracker Island by Gorillaz. Now, I will admit that this may not be the best album that was put out last year. I think there's definitely some weak tracks on it, but I am such a huge Gorillaz fan, I don't really care. There was a time right after Plastic Beach in the fall that I didn't think we were getting any more Gorillaz music, so they will almost always be included on these lists just by default because, again, I didn't think we were getting anything else from them. This is a super fun album. There are a couple tracks that just don't quite do it for me. Specifically, one of the singles, New Gold. I think it's fine. I like Tame Impala's vocals on it. But I do think Booty Brown's verse is really weak. I love Booty Brown. I really like the Far Side and like the stuff that he's did specifically on Clint Eastwood. Or on Dirty Harry, excuse me. But it just doesn't do it for me on this track. I'm not a huge fan of it. But that being said, almost the entire rest of the album I think is really good. I don't love Tormenta with Bad Bunny. I don't think it's just necessarily like my cup of tea. I'm not a huge Bad Bunny fan. I get why he's popular. I get why so many people like him. But that song does feel a little out of place on this album with a more sort of like dance hall, you know, not EDM, but like more dance hall kind of Latin flavor on an album that is almost exclusively sort of like more psych pop and synth pop and a little bit more of like dreamy aesthetics to it. So again, it just feels a little out of place on the album. But that being said, there's some really good tracks on here, including the opening track with Thundercat, I think is really good. And a song Oil with Stevie Nicks. I love that there's a few features on this album that Damon uses very like sparingly. So like even like on Oil with Stevie Nicks, you've got arguably one of the greatest vocalists of all time, but he uses her more as just sort of like backing vocals to his own, which I think works really well. And then the track Skinny Ape may just be my all-time favorite Gorillaz track, or at least up there. It's top 5. It's one of my favorites that's come out in a very long time. I could play that song on repeat forever and probably not get tired of it. So almost exclusively for that track, this makes it onto this album. But there's a lot of really fun songs front to back, from Silent Running to Tarantula. Like it's a great album, and again, without couple bad spots here and there, but outside of those, I think it's definitely deserving of a place in my top five. All right, and next we're gonna have Petrodraconic Apocalypse, or Dawn of Eternal Night, an Annihilation of Planet Earth, and the Beginning of Merciless Damnation by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Now, this is a hell of an album. If that album title doesn't do that or tell you that right off the bat, it is a thrash, stoner, prog metal album from Australian psych rock band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. They are one of my favorite bands to come out of the past decade. I cannot get enough. I have not quite their entire discography, but I'm working my way to it. They've got like almost 30 albums at this point, 30 studio albums. This is the second foray that they've done into heavier music. It's kind of the follow up to Infest the Rat's Nest, which came out a few years prior. And while I do think Infest the Rat's Nest is a better metal album, it's a little bit heavier. I love some of the just really fast sort of elements that they have on that album. I think this is actually a better King Giz album, just because it's got a little bit more of like their proggy psychness that they're really known for, and it works really well on this. It's a concept album, themes of like environmental destruction and overconsumption, overpopulation. Essentially, humanity is, overpopulated the earth to a point now where it's almost uninhabitable, and there are these giant superstorms that have, you know, been created due to our hubris, and they are destroying the earth. So a group of witches get together to try and, counteract it, cast some sort of spell, and unwillingly or unwittingly doing so, accidentally turn their pet Gia monster into a giant fire-breathing dragon, which then goes on to destroy the earth. So, not a light subject by any means, definitely very culturally relevant right now, but even outside of all of that, it's still just a killer metal album. The really highlights, I think, are like kind of in the middle of the album with the tracks Witchcraft and Gia Monster, and then the last couple songs with Dragon and Fire Breather, or Flamethrower, excuse me, are just such a great way to end the album. And if you like heavy music at all, definitely give it a listen. It is, I think, one of the better just straight up thrash metal or like prog metal albums to come out in the past 10 years. And I love putting this thing on when I'm in a bit of a heavier mood. All right, and coming in at number 4 is going to be The Surface by Beartooth. Now, this is probably one of my favorite like hardcore metalcore albums to come out in the past decade. I think it is definitely one of his strongest outputs. It took me a while actually to discover Beartooth, and I don't know why, because I was such a big fan of Attack Attack back in the day. I don't know what it took or like why I wasn't more up to date on not just this, but the other Attack Attack member, Johnny Frank's solo project with Bill Murray. But needless to say, I'm glad that I did eventually discover him. I first listened to Beartooth or Caleb Shomo's solo project with Below, which is the album that came out right before this, which was great. It was heavy, it was dark, it was intense, very well done, very well written. But this, on almost a complete like 180, is just about one of the most positive albums I've ever listened to. The messages throughout this are all about like self-love and appreciating yourself for where you are and being positive and just again like loving life and not dwelling on your mistakes or dwelling on your past. And honestly, it is so refreshing to hear this in a genre that is not typically known for for positivity. If you're a fan of pop punk, metalcore, hardcore, anything like even remotely resembling those genres, definitely give this one a listen. I think it is probably going to be one of my favorite albums of the past decade, just because of how well it incorporates a lot of those elements that like I really love about hardcore and metalcore and pop punk, and does it in such a new and refreshing way. And I can't wait to see what he follows this up with. All right, and last but certainly not least is going to be 10,000 Gex by 100 Gex. Now, This is a wild fucking album. It took me like 5 or 6 listens to really get into this thing. But for some reason, like it kept pulling me back in. It is a weird combination of like crunkcore, pop, what people are calling hyper pop that like they claim these guys invented, which they didn't. I mean, Sleigh Bells and Hypercrush were doing it, 10 years ago. But I think that like for the newer generation of fans and newer generation of artists, like these guys are doing it incredibly well and probably better than almost anyone else out there. And while I did enjoy their first album, 1000 Gex, I think it was still a little rough, a little raw. They were using really heavy like auto tuning and vocoder filters on the frontwoman Laura Less's vocals, which I understand. I mean, she's a trans woman, so I think there was a bit of like voice dysmorphia in play there. But on this album, while they still do use the auto tuning and the vocoder effects, there's also a lot of just like her natural voice thrown in, which I think is really good. I think it's done really well. And I really do enjoy it on the tracks that it's on. But this thing, like in front to back, is just an absolute roller coaster. There's so many different genres they're throwing at you, from ska to indie rock to like crunkcore to new metal. It's just a bunch of stuff that shouldn't go together and honestly should not make sense. And for whatever reason, it works so well. I don't think this album should be as good as it is, and I still don't quite understand, even though I've listened to it 20 plus times at this point, how they're able to just make it so good. But it's got some of the catchiest tracks you'll ever hear, in like 747 and Hollywood Baby. Really fun song, like indie rock ska song about just like a frog that they found in their house. There's a weird kind of experimental hyper pop track about Doritos and Fritos. It's just, again, I mean, a straight up ska song about like getting your tooth removed. I cannot talk highly enough about this album. If you haven't listened to it, you definitely need to go check it out. You're definitely going to come out of it with strong feelings about it. All right, cool, guys. So that's it. Those are my top 5 albums of 2023. Let me know down in the comments what your top 5 albums of 2023 were. Let me know if you've listened to these albums, if you loved them, if you hated them. If you haven't, go check them out. And as always, talk to you later.